Good morning, children. So, in today's class, let us try to understand the golden age of Indian culture of Gupta. So, the golden age of Indian culture. That means we all know that Guptas have mostly contributed to the cultural areas of India, so that we can understand how and along with the administrative importance, cultural importance or cultural contributions to Gupta, by Guptas is was very important. The Gupta period is described as the golden age of Indian culture because of the high level of civilization and culture of this period. So, culture refers to starting from language, the way, the kind of literature they do, and the kind of religion they follow. Everything, they're all part of culture. So here the Gupta period is described as golden age of culture, Indian culture, because it was during this period the Vedic civilization or the Vedic culture has been revived and the civilization was very high. So you can think civilization, use of coins was started, and also there was a lot of agricultural help done by these rulers. Irrigation activities were promoted on a large scale. All such things, and the kind of literature they wrote was very advanced. And these all things prove that, and there were many cities existing in those days that proves that the level of civilization was very high. And culture of this period is also very high because there are great poets like Kalidasa, Vara, and other people like astronomers, and the way they contributed to science and other mathematics and other fields, they reveal that the culture of this period is also very high. So, along with the revival of Hinduism, the power of creativity was unleashed, that means revealed, in the fields of education, literature, arts, architecture, and science. So, revival of Hinduism was one major contribution done by Guptas, and secondly, creativity in the field of education, literature, arts, architecture, and science, it occupies another important level of contribution by Guptas. This period also saw the extension of this influence beyond India's frontiers. So even during these days, Gupta's influence was beyond frontiers, means beyond its borders. So it could influence even the, many other places even outside India. So let us study what kind of education they had. So just try to remember that the education in those days was, in one way, it was like Vedic, education. Okay, so the Vedic education was also given, as well as there was a kind of education where the Jains and Buddhists who were contemporary living in those days also had their own kind of thing. So during Gupta age, education was given utmost importance. How we know that they have given utmost importance? The intellectual output in various fields like literature, science, mathematics, astronomy, astrology, and medicine. So, in various fields like astronomy, mathematics, you take Brahmagupta; astronomy, you take Varahamihira and Aryabhatta. So, science, in literature, you take Kalidasa. There were some great intellectuals in these fields. That shows how they were giving importance to education in those days. There were many centers of learning in cities like Pataliputra, Vallabhi, Ujjain, Ayodhya, and Nasik. So this also reveals that educational centers, the number of educational centers during Guptas were more, like Ujjain, Ayodhya, and Nasik. That also reveals the importance that they were giving to education. According to inscriptions, teachers were learned Brahmanas. So by this thing, we can understand that during the Gupta's time, the kind of education that was in practice was maybe Vedic education. Why we are saying it as Vedic education? Because Brahmanas were the people who acting as teachers. They were known as acharyas, and upadhyayas. So, and sometimes they were also given the title of bhattas. So, with these different titles called upadhyayas, acharyas, and bhattas, the brahmanas were the teachers, and these teachers were supported by the grant of villages called agraharas given by the Gupta rulers. So during those days, what the kings used to do is they used to donate some villages for this Brahmins so that the income generated from that villages are received by these Brahmanas or teachers, and they make their livelihood. And in return, they act as the teachers. Okay, so they teach all the students, especially the royal family people, and thereby creating a livelihood for them. And suppose if there are four villages here, and these four villages will be given to certain two or three Brahmans, and the Brahmans were dependent on these villages. They were called as agraharas. So they are the donations made by the rulers to the Brahmans because they are given utmost respect and they are acting as they were playing the role of teachers in those days. And charity is given by general public. So not only kings donated villages or lands in the form of agraharas, but also public also used to donate very generously. That means in a very kind and compassionate manner, they used to donate a lot of money, land, and production to Brahmanas. The disciples called Shishyas. So the teacher was called as Upadhyaya and the disciples were called Shishyas. They had to learn 14 sections of science. So as a part of learning, they will go for science. So in science, how many sections they have to learn? 14 sections of science they have to learn. That means in 14 different areas they have to excel. It was called Chaturdasa Vidya. Okay. So what does that 14 sections comprise? It comprises of Puranas, Mimamsa, Nyaya, and Dharma. So we know that this, six Vedangas they have to learn. They have to learn four Vedas, six Vedangas, 10, and Puranas 11, Mimamsa 12, Nyaya 13, and Dharma 14. Thus, the science that they learn comprises of 14 sections. So, we have studied this all can be compiled or this all can be compressed under the Vedic literature, isn't it? So, basically, they used to have a very strong foundation with Vedic literature and also the Shatasahasri Samhita or the Mahabharata. This was also a very important concept which they learn, and Vyakarana, that is grammar part. So written by Ashtadhyayi of Panini. So along with the 14 sections of science, they also learnt the Vyakarana or grammar and the Mahabharata. So, so like this, okay, this education was playing a role. This was the kind of education practiced by Guptas. There were other kinds of education in practice during those days. Let us see what are those. So, in the Gupta period, the Jain and Buddhist systems of education assumed a different dimension. So, contemporarily, there was even people with Jain and Buddhist traditions or systems of education. So, what was Jain and Buddhist system of education? They carried on education through monasteries. So, for almost a period of 10 years. If you take Buddhist monastery is a place where the monks and the monks and other nuns live, and they take a period of 10 years to practice. They have their education where their Buddhist texts and other philosophical aspects will be studied, and the teachings of Buddhism and other such things will be studied. Also, they were given a chance to interpret the text and write their own books. They have their own quarters inside the monastery. Libraries were established. So many such things. But It refers to nowhere you can see any Vedic kind of study here. Only the Buddhist literary studies and scientific studies were also carried on in this monasteries. So this was a contemporary kind of education existing during those days, side by side with Vedic education. Learning began with oral method. That means through a teacher they learn, and later they shifted to the reading of literary text. So initially there was a passage of knowledge by oral method, and late after that it was allowed for those people to read the texts which were written by the great Buddhist scholars. The monasteries had libraries. So whatever the scholars have written, their own interpretations, and many other such books were all kept in libraries. So inside a monastery, a library will also exist, and they stay there in their quarters inside the monastery. They have a prayer hall inside the monastery, as well as they have a library. So inside this library, there will be books written by great Buddhist scholars, which are interpreting the teachings of Buddha and other things, and they used to read this literary text. Important manuscripts were copied and stored. So another important job that the students have to do, or the teachers used to do, was they used to copy the important texts or manuscripts. Suppose you take Buddha, their scriptures were called Jatakas and other such things. So all such things, they need number of copies, right? So that many number of people can read. So that copies were also made inside the monasteries. Their education was even allowed to copy their literary texts, and students from other countries like China and Southeast Asia came to the Buddhist monasteries for education. So students from all over the world, they visited these monasteries, and they used to contribute their own kind of uh, you know they used to contribute their own things. If you even take Fahin and other great pilgrimages, they even visited Pataliputra and all, right? So they observed the things, and during the Samudragupta and Chandragupta too's time, how Fahin contributed his own thing. So this kind of literary contributions were also done by students from outside India, so especially from China and Southeast Asian countries. So, so this kind of education was also contemporarily existing. The monasteries were normally maintained by grants from kings and the rich mercantile class. So, under the Gupta rulers, some kings were following still the Buddhism and the Jain practices. They used to donate some kind of grants, some lands they donate, and the amount of the production received from that land will be used for running that monastery. And also the rich mercantile class means the business people who are very rich and all, they used to donate very liberally a lot of grants to these monasteries. So that's this kind of people from various places coming, it attracted the scholars from far and near. So especially these monasteries, they have attracted the scholars from very far places. For example, you take Fahin also spent several years in the monastery at Pataliputra studying Buddhist religious books. So this was one example. Fahin, who was a Chinese pilgrim, he visited India during Chandragupta II's time, and later, no, he spent his most of his life in the monastery at Pataliputra studying Buddhist religious book. And you know how great he contributed to understanding of Gupta culture, because he was observing all the things happening on in the kingdom under the Gupta Empire, and he mentioned various observations of his in his books. So thus historically also these scholars contributed a lot, as well as they tried to understand the Buddhist literature and other such things in their monasteries. Higher education was given equal importance. See, higher education, how do you know that Guptas have given importance to higher education? So there was evident of number of universities which existed during this period. So number of universities were existing during this Gupta period. Okay, the two popular universities were Takshashila and Nalanda University. So, what are the two universities that were existing in a very, what do you call, more advanced way in those days? Takshashila and Nalanda University. The Takshashila University was one of the first few centers in the world which offered higher education. So, you can see this Takshashila University in modern day Pakistan, and due to the attacks of Huns and all, this university was destroyed later, but it was mostly founded by Chanakya or Kautilya. So even during Mauryan times, this university was existing, where he was working as a professor earlier, who this man Chanakya. So it was existing from various centuries ago, but during Gupta's time, these universities have seen their glory. So they were operational with the great student and teachers from different parts of the world. And this university was, however, established before Gupta Empire came into existence. So among the two universities, Takshashila University was very old. I told you it was founded by this man Kautilya or Chanakya, and he also used to work as a professor in that university. It was almost one of the very few centers of higher education in the world. So it is present in modern day Pakistan if you want to see in the map, and this was it has seen its glory, or it has seen its flourishment during the time of Guptas, and it also I mean, that's what I was saying, that it had been established before the Gupta Empire, but it has seen its glory or flourishing during the time of Guptas. So Nalanda University was the most renowned educational institution of ancient India. So if you compare to even modern day India, there was another prominent university. Where is that university located? Nalanda in Rajagriha in Bihar. So in a place called Nalanda in Rajagriha of Bihar, there's an ancient most university found called Nalanda University. So this is its location, and a lot of information about Nalanda University is given in the inscriptions and in the accounts of Huan Sang, a Chinese Buddhist scholar who visited India during the reign of Harshavardhana. So this was also started, I mean, just before the Guptas, but it had seen its glorification again during Guptas. So here, a ruler of Harshavardhana, no, the Vardhana dynasty, which was just before Guptas, I mean, during the times it was started, and there is a mention of this university by a famous Chinese Buddhist scholar called Huan Sang. So Huan Sang mentioned about Nalanda University in his observations, and it happened during the time of Harshavardhana. I mean, just before Guptas and after Mauryans, there were many interim rulers. So among them, the Vardhana dynasty ruler was Harshavardhana, and during his time, Huansang visited India, and in his visit to India, he mentioned about this Nalanda University of Bihar, and the University of Nalanda had imposing buildings. Imposing buildings means very grand and very what do you call the buildings were so grand, and they were very big. So that is the meaning of the imposing buildings. There were at least 8 colleges built by different patrons, including one by Balaputra Deva, king of Sumatra. So under these universities, there were many colleges under functional. That means, see, suppose if this is the university, and these used to function under 8 different colleges. Suppose you take in modern day, if you take any one university, we have one engineering as one college, we have arts as one college, we have other medicine as one other college. Like this, there were 8 different colleges. Okay, at least 8 different colleges under this University of Nalanda. Based on the subject of study, they had different colleges of study and built by different patrons, means people who encourage. So among many kings used to encourage and they built different colleges under these universities. Among that, Balaputra Deva, king of Sumatra, okay, he built one of the colleges, and according to Huan Sang, the whole university area was enclosed by a brick wall. So this Nalanda University, according to the if you, observations of Huan Sang, he noted that it was having a compound wall made of bricks. The whole university was surrounded by a compound wall. This was the observation of Huan Sang. So one thing you need to understand is Huan Sang's observation and how many 8 colleges of study was there. One of the colleges was constructed by Balaputra Deva, and also they observed that there was a compound wall around this university. It provided various facilities to students for their studies. One of the greatest facilities that it provided was libraries. There were 3 libraries called Ratnasagar, Ratnadhadi, and Ratnaranjak. So these are the 3 libraries that were operational under Nalanda University, and there were more than 10,000 students and teachers in this university. You can imagine the kind of you know flourishing that going on, the kind of glory that it was having. More than 10,000 students and teachers used to work in this universities. I mean, students they used to learn and the teachers they used to participate. These came from different parts of the world like Korea, Mongolia, Japan, China, Tibet, Ceylon or Sri Lanka, and various parts of India. So people from different parts of the world visited this Nalanda University. They stayed there, they worked as teachers, they learned as students, and many such things happened. And this was the greatness of Nalanda University. So, what kind of subjects were studied in this Nalanda University? The 4 Vedas were studied, logic was studied, which was like grammar. You can know that it was like Vyakaran, and medicine, Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, and the Buddhist works of the different schools. So Nalanda University was a mix of both, a study center with a mix of both Vedic as well as Buddhist schools of learning. Here they studied 4 Vedas, and these are all the schools of philosophy, right? The Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, they are the schools of philosophy as per Vedic literature. So all these were studied along with medicine. Okay, this was also an important area of study in Nalanda University. Along this Vedic kind of studies, even the Buddhist works were also studied with the different under different schools. So this was the subjects that were studied in this Nalanda universities. It was not an ordinary university. So why it was called as not an, I mean, it was called an extraordinary university, or why it was not a very ordinary university? Because a postgraduate study was possible only in this university. I mean, to an extent of post graduation. So modern day, you take after our degree and all, then we proceed to our post graduation. So that kind of postgraduate studies, that means very advanced studies, were happening in this institution, and the admission process was very difficult. Why we are saying that admission to this university was very difficult? Examination, an entrance examination was held in which hardly 20% students passed. So as the competition is very high for this Nalanda University, the authorities of Nalanda universities used to conduct uh, entrance examination, and only 20% students could pass through those examination. That means if 100 students write the exam, only 20 can get through entrance examination. So, and the rest were rejected outrightly. So the most brilliant were admitted to this university. This kind of system of admission and the way it was, the kind of studies and subjects and the level of standard of studies going on in this university reveals its greatness. That shows that it was not an ordinary university. It attracted from various, scholars from various parts of the world. Nalanda continued to be a beacon of light. That means it was serving as a torch bearer. That means it used to show the light of education to the entire world, or to various people in different parts of the world. It used to serve as a frontline runner in terms of education in those days, the quality of education that it was providing. And when it was destroyed by Muhammad bin Bakhtiar Khilji, a general of Muhammad Ghori. So what happened? A Bakhtiar Khilji. He was a general of Muhammad Ghori. What he did, he destroyed this Nalanda University. Today only the remains of its magnificence and glory can be seen. So why Bakhtiar Khilji destroyed, who was a general of Muhammad Ghori, that we will come to know now. So Khilji, because for a silly reason, no, he ordered, because the kind of medicinal experts found in Nalanda University were not as good as his experts. Sorry, they were very good, better than the Khilji's experts in his palace. So naturally, he went and he destroyed all the Nalanda University. That was, most accepted fact as of now. But just remember that that's not useful. And let us come to the contribution of Guptas in the areas of science. And during the Gupta period, the great contribution was made in many branches of sciences. So, what kind of sciences were under study? Astronomy, the study of planets; medicine, you know very well; and metallurgy. So, metallurgy means the way metals have to be extracted, mixing of metals and forming a new alloy of metals. All such things they can be studied under metallurgy. These were the important areas of science where they made lot of contribution. So let us see who are the greatest people in those areas. Varahamihira. So who was this man and what did he contributed? His contribution was in the field of astronomy. What did he found? Varahamihira as an astronomer found that moon rotates round the earth and earth rotates round the sun. So such great important principles of astronomy were given by Varahamihira. And the Brihat Samhita of Varahamihira deals with astronomy. That means the book composed by Varahamihira was Brihat Samhita. It deals a very in-depth understanding of astronomy, nature and botany. So in this Brihat Samhita, there are different kinds of studies happen. One is it describes about astronomy, and the other thing is botany, the study of plants and other things, and natural history. So this was also part of a study, and physical geography, that is different landforms and other such things were also studied. So, like natural history means the observation of plants and animals, recording their data. So, all such things come under natural history and physical geography. Okay, so different kinds of landforms, the kind of soil, other such things, no, they were studied under physical geography. Varahamihra, he was a great astronomer. What was his contribution to astronomy? That moon rotates around the earth and earth rotates around the sun. This was a important discovery he made. And also his book Brihat Samhita describes about botany, natural history, astronomy as well as physical geography. And this was about astronomical greatness and the great scholar existing in those days. Another great scholar called Brahmagupta. What was his contribution? He was a great mathematician and astronomer. So, in the fields of astronomy and mathematics, he contributed a lot. So, in terms of astronomy and other things, law of gravitation several centuries before Newton. So, he gave the rules or he described the law of gravitation. Maybe he would not have experimented and all. We don't know what was the how they found out and all without any modern equipment and all. But much before Sir Isaac Newton, the laws of gravitation was explained by Brahmagupta, a great scholar during Gupta period. Metallurgy, of the scientific study of metals, had reached an advanced stage during the Gupta period. So another great science. See, we studied about three science: astronomy, medicine, and metallurgy. So among this, the metallurgy was also an important study of science. So here, the iron pillar at Mehroli near Qutub Minar in New Delhi, this reveals the study of metals or the grandeur of metallurgical studies that Guptas carried on. See, this pillar was erected in a place called Mehroli, which is near Qutub Minar. And you know the importance of this iron pillar, you can see here, even though it was installed some thousands of years ago in an open atmosphere like this, even today it is not catching any rust. Okay, that shows how much skillful these people are. Charaka and Shushruta were the famous scholars of Ayurveda. So, in terms of medicine, so in terms of astronomy, we have Varahamihra as well as Brahmagupta. And in terms of metallurgy, this iron pillar reveals the maximum information. And in terms of medicine, Ayurveda, which was which was a natural medicinal science, was developed by Shushruta and Charaka. So through their books and their contributions, they were the famous scholars of Ayurveda during Gupta's time. And coming to Aryabhatta, okay, another great scholar of this time. He was a great astronomer and mathematician. So, like Brahmagupta, Aryabhatta was also a great astronomer and mathematician. And during the rule of Gupta dynasty, his two famous books were Aryabhattiyam and Surya Siddhanta. So the famous books written by Aryabhatta was Aryabhattiyam and Surya Siddhanta. Let us see what were the achievements or what were the greatest contributions of Aryabhatta with his books as well as with his scientific study. He said that the earth moves round the sun. So just like how Varahamihra said, he just advanced it in a more rational way and he proved that earth moves round the sun. And it was several centuries before the Europeans he said the same thing. You can understand, not just Copernicus and all such people who later said all these things, but it was this man, Aryabhatta, he said many centuries before these Europeans could predict this. Like, the earth moves around the sun. That was his astronomical contribution. He discovered the rule for finding the area of triangle. So, the area of triangle half BH. And this kind of a rule to discover the area of triangle was made by this man Aryabhatta. He calculated the exact value of pi. Okay, so what was the pi value? That is, 22 by 7, that means 3.14 something. That value was calculated by Aryabhatta. So he calculated that the value of pi was equal to 3.146. And the credit for development of trigonometry also goes to Aryabhatta. In his work Surya Siddhanta, he explained the causes of solar and lunar eclipses. So one contribution was area of triangle, another was in the field of astronomy that the sun revolves, earth revolves around the sun, and also in his work Surya Siddhanta, he explained the solar and lunar eclipses. Aryabhatta was also acquainted with the decimal system and use of zero. So it was by this contribution, the discovery of zero by Indians. So he was acquainted with the use of zero. This placed Indians in a very high position in the field of mathematics and the decimal system, that is using of points and all. And these are all the contributions of Guptas in the field of education and science. What exactly they contributed to culture? So as I told you, language, religion, you take even our temples, All such things, they come under our, they are part of culture, they together contribute our culture. So the Gupta Empire was a well organized state under a succession of versatile and mighty rulers who led it from one point of achievement to another. So in terms of culture, they have achieved a greater height and political stability. So there was political stability, so trade and commerce flourished. Politically, the Guptas were very powerful rulers. Their palace and their ministers and the kind of administration they carried on, it was very stable. So when politically situations were very stable in the empire, naturally trade and the commerce, that means the export and import as well as the local businesses, everything, they were very much flourishing. They were very much flourishing. This economic prosperity allowed people to pursue various arts and crafts and literary activities. See, the kind of literary activities that happened in Gupta period was having a series of events responsible for that. That is, political stability was there. When political stability is there, the trade and commerce will operate more, and when trade and commerce operate more, lot of wealth will be accumulated, and when lot of wealth is there, people remain happy as well as they get economical stability. When economical stability is there due to wealth, they can dedicate their time for this kind of cultural activities. So what are the cultural activities that they, I mean, what the kind of cultural developments that they did in terms of arts and crafts and in terms of literary things? They got a very ample amount of time to spend. Otherwise, if economically they are not rich, then they would be spending most of their time in making their livelihood. Okay, so a very hard earning livelihood may be there, so that was not there. So when wealth was good and they were making a nice wealth and they're very prosperous, naturally their minds were relaxed and they could contribute to more in art and crafts and literary activities. Thus the ideal conditions available in Gupta age led to the unprecedented development of, so thus this Gupta period served as a very ideal time for the development of culture in a very rapid manner. And during the Gupta period, temples were built with elaborate details. So the development or the construction of temples was also a revealing factor of their culture. How they have constructed temples and all also adds to the culture. Unlike the earlier period, that means before this Guptas, there were wood or other perishable material was used. Perishable means which can be lost in a few span of years. So that kind of material and wood was used for construction of temples. But during the Gupta's time, temples were constructed using solid material like bricks and stone. So in the field of temples or in the development of temples, Guptas have constructed temples with elaborate details. That means you can understand the kind of sculptural work that they carried on the temple walls and pillars was phenomenal. And not only that, they have also changed the way the materials used for construction of temples. Earlier, the temples were mostly used constructed using wood or other perishable means other material which will get destroyed in very a few span of years time. But the way Guptas made constructed temples was it remained for thousands of years because of bricks and stones they used in the construction of. So this kind of material used for construction of you know temples was started by this Guptas, and it made the temples also to remain for many thousands of years unperishable. So the Vishnu temple at Devgad, okay, so this was an example of their cultural richness. So it's a Dashavatara temple. It's also called Dashavatara temple, and it was the finest example of Gupta architecture. So you can see the Vishnu temple at Devgad. So this place is located 125 kilometers away from Jhansi Uttar Pradesh. So this temple was constructed by Guptas, and it was a Lord Vishnu temple. That is the Shavatara temple. All his avatars were there as a important idols in these temples, and it is located from Jhansi. It is located near Jhansi in Uttar Pradesh. It is one of the earliest Hindu stone temples to survive till date. So till date, this was a surviving, and it's a temple made of stone. Okay, that's another. I told you that Gupta started using of stone as a material for construction of temples. It was the first North Indian temple with a shikara or a tower, although a part of it has disappeared. So here you can see this was a kind of temple for the first time with this kind of shikara. Okay, so this kind of thing was started in North India by Guptas, and this temple, so Shikara tower, was partly it was destroyed, but remaining part was existing. This tower kind of temple was seen in North India. For the first time, it was constructed by Guptas. And in spite of its dilapidated condition, the temple has a compelling presence. That means even though so here dilapidated condition means it was almost because of negligence, or you take because of not or because of many years, it is in a very condition of ruined condition. Almost it was all its great, all its walls and other things fell off. So in spite of that condition, the temple has a compelling presence. You can still feel that the kind of glory that it brought. It was completely made of stone and bricks, and it was built on a 1.5-meter high platform. So you can see here the platform here, which was so this Vishnu temple at Devgarh, it is built on a 1.5-meter high platform. You can see this platform, and on which a tower kind of construction has been done. So four stairways outside the platform provide access to the temple. It's that is this is staircase, okay, on four directions. To just enter into this temple from four sides, they have constructed staircases. Its exterior is decorated with scenes from Ramayana. So even though it is Vishnu temple and Dashavatara temple, outside these temples there were it is decorated with Ramayana, scenes from Ramayana. So on this place you can see all kinds of images, or what you call the inscriptions, or the kind of sculptor work they carried. It depicts the scene from Ramayana. The entrance and pillars were adorned with countless paintings, so which was not there, but they kept it here, and all the pillars and all which were collapsed and all, so they kept it to the side here. And you can see that under from that understanding, they said that there were countless paintings and carvings. Okay, so that means paintings, there was a number of paintings done on that depicting the various historical scenes, and also carvings means with a different kind of images on it and all such things. It is dedicated to Lord Vishnu, the god of preservation. So as per the Vedic system, god of preservation was Lord Vishnu. So it was dedicated to Lord Vishnu god, who is shown asleep on the coil of giant serpent called Sheshanaga. So you can see inside this temple, the idol would be like sleeping Vishnu with the Sheshanaga, or the serpent, covering his uh, sleep. There was a outer wall around the temple. So if you look at the surrounding this temple, there is also an outer wall constructed. So this kind of temple construction and the great kind of interest, or the great kind of work they carried on in the architecture, reveals not only their architectural skills, but also their way of encouragement to culture. So if you come to the literature and contribution, okay, in what ways Guptas have contributed to literature? So let me make it very simple for you. I'll not go very in depth. So the kind of languages that they were using in Gupta's day was Sanskrit. So Sanskrit was the important language that they were using, and another language they were using was, sorry, it replaced Prakrit. Okay, so Sanskrit was given more importance, and Prakrit, which was another Indo-Aryan language, much before to them, was replaced not only in inscriptions but also in the religious and philosophical literature. So earlier Prakrit was followed during Mauryans, Buddhism, and so you know why Prakrit was allowed, because Buddhists and Jains, they wanted to use the local language so that people can understand their scriptures. To make them easy, they have used this Prakrit. But later on, these Guptas who have come, they replaced Prakrit with Sanskrit language. And Sanskrit became the language of the learned and retained its supreme position for 1,000 years. So the kind of encouragement given to Sanskrit was phenomenal in those days, and even in philosophical and religious literature, you can see completely people or the scholars using Sanskrit. And it was also called language of learned, because only the Brahmanas and other great scholars can understand this language, and they are the people who are preserving this language, or patrons of this language. Guptas made Sanskrit official language for administrative purposes. So even all the administrative activities or orders issued by the kings used to happen in Sanskrit language. It was used in official documents as well as in inscriptions. So all the official orders and documents as well as the inscriptions on pillars and various in other books and other such things, the language used by Guptas was Sanskrit. The classical Sanskrit literature that flowered during Gupta period consisting of epics, poetry, drama, lyrics, and prose. So in all these kind of areas, they used Sanskrit language. You take poetry, you take epics, depiction of epics. Suppose if they want to depict this Ramayana as scenes on the temple, the language they use will be definitely Sanskrit language. And also, both religious and secular literature existed side by side. So in those days, even the Jain and Buddhist, texts were there written in very simple language called Pali, and both existed side by side. Even though Guptas encouraged Sanskrit, that doesn't mean that they have discouraged. They have suppressed other languages, but they also made this Sanskrit more flourishable, and they also made other languages to exist side by side with a natural existence. So Gupta age was distinguished by a number of writers. Okay, they included Kalidasa, Sudraka, Bhasa, Harisena, Dandin, Subhandhu, and Bharavi. These are some of the greatest scholars of writers, writers who were present during the time of Guptas. Just try to remember their names: Kalidasa, Sudraka, Subhandhu, Dandin, Bharavi, Bhasa, and Harisena. So in this we have studied about Harisena, right? During the days of Samudragupta, he was responsible for that, you know, inscription. So such these are the great scholars of those days. Among them, Kalidasa, the famous poet and dramatist, his works occupied a very important place in historical literature. So Kalidasa was an important poet who occupied a very prominent role in historically, and he belongs to that Gupta period. He was regarded as the greatest poet and playwright. Okay, so what do you mean by playwright? He can write some story where the characters know how they behave, how the drama goes on, such kind of things. For the first time, Kalidasa made a magnificent contribution to that playwright and poetry. And Vincent Smith, he compared the Gupta age with Elizabethan period in the history of England. According to him, in India all the lesser lights are outshone by the brilliancy of Kalidasa, as in England all the smaller authors were overshadowed by Shakespeare. Just try to understand that Vincent Smith, the historian, he compared Kalidasa with Shakespeare, just like how Shakespeare occupied in the in the branches of English playwright and poetry his prominent role. Kalidasa was also like a he occupied such a prominent position in the Indian poetry and playwright. So other poetic works done by Kalidasa was Ritusamhara, Raghuvamsha, Meghdoota and Kumara Sambhava. These are some of the greatest playwrights he did. So those were the poetic works done by Kalidasa. Dramatic works or playwrights done by Kalidasa were Vikramoorvasiyam, Malavikagnimitram, Abhignana Shakuntalam. So these are the his drama. So see, there are poetic works as well as playwrights or dramatic works. Among the poetic works, we have studied just now what are they, and among the playwright works, we can see this Vikramorvasiyam, Malavikagnimittram, and Abhignana Shakuntalam. These are the dramatic works, and those are the poetic works which were written by Kalidasa. His dramatic work Abhignana Shakuntalam narrates the love story of King Dushyanta and Shakuntala. So the love story of Dushyanta and Shakuntala was phenomenally dramatized by Kalidasa in his in his dramatic work called Abhignana Shakuntalam, whose son Bharata became the ruler of India later. And the Meghaduta, the cloud messenger, is equally an outstanding lyrical poetic work. So Meghaduta, Abhignana Shakuntalam, this and no Malavikagnimitram, where Chandragupta Vikramaditya was portrayed as a real hero. Okay, his king, during whose court he was residing, it was written to commemorate the marriage of the daughter Prabhavati with Rudrasena. So his works were very great in such a way that Malavikagnimitram, you take Meghaduta, it's a cloud messenger, poetic work between two people, how they considered cloud as a messenger and how they passed on the message. Such a dramatic thing was portrayed by Kalidasa in a beautiful manner. And in Malavikagnimitram, okay, so where Chandragupta Vikramaditya, as part of his expeditions, he'll also get his daughter Prabhavati married to Rudrasena, and the events and the greatness of the marriage he performed, and all such things were beautifully dramatized by this man Kalidasa in his book Malavikagnimitram. All the works of Kalidasa, especially dramatic works, have been translated into many major languages of the world. So this was a great respect that he got. That means many great scholars throughout the world, they have translated these great poetic works because of their highly civilized literary work. The way he dramatized, the way he used words and all in it, it made other scholars also showed interest. I mean, to show interest in reading that, and they have translated them into various other languages of the world and made available to different parts of the world. Although the subject matter of Kalidasa's works is love, nature, and beauty, they nevertheless get reliable information about government. Kalidasa not only his works like this Abhignana Shakuntalam, Vikramorvasiyam and all described about love, nature, and beauty. It also gave some kind of information about government, society, and religion of Gupta period. So this was also portrayed in the works. Besides, they also contains traces of political history. So how the rulers were ruling, who were the greatest rulers, and know what kind of religion they adapted. All such information was also given in his literary works.